Hi, Aries. Welcome to your June 2020 Astro Alchemy. It's Raina here. So, this is a month where there is energy, or you could say influence, in your third house of communication as the month begins with the Sun in Gemini, as well as with Venus retrograding in Gemini. So, that third house is definitely active. And with the Venus retrograde here, this could be like hearing back from somebody from your past, maybe online. If there is something going on with a sibling, money that is connected to, or potential money connected to a teaching or tutoring job that you were not able to take advantage of in the past, and now you have more free time or whatever, things of that nature. Or, going back over a writing project that you want to complete, because Venus is associated with the arts. So that could be something in the third house that has a literary flavor to it. And Venus will be in Gemini all month long. It goes direct on the 25th of the month. So you're going to start to see resolution in this area, whatever it is. The third house, it can be like values connected to the third house. And, like for instance, let's say you're thinking about moving, which you could totally be Aries, because you're going to have a solar eclipse. I think it's very powerful in that fourth house of home and family. I'll get to that in a minute. But that could prompt you to think like, what is the local area? What does it need to be like? Sometimes people seem to focus on the house itself, but not necessarily the community. The third house can be the community. And do you want a community where you have to drive to get to all of the things that you want, or that it's walkable, that you can access things on foot and, things like that? What are your values as it connects to the area in which you live, the surrounding community? It might sound kind of weird and contrived for me to, mention that, but I really do feel that it's a big deal. It's so funny because I have no planets in the third house in my natal chart, and yet I'm one of those people who's always on foot. I'm always walking around my community, so go figure. But anyway, so you have that going on, and then Mars is in Pisces until the 27th of the month. Well, that's your 12th house. And so it's kind of funny because, I don't know what the end of June is going to look like in terms of all of us, and I'm speaking especially in the United States concerning our shutdown situation. Like, will it be pretty much back up to speed? I mean, as I record this in the last week of May, we're starting to see more movement. But, Mars in the 12th house can be kind of like, because that's your ruler. The 12th house is like the hermit. So you might be kind of feeling that sense of wanting to bust loose. Mars is very active, and the 12th house is very contemplative. And the only thing I can think of that makes any sense with Mars in the 12th house is Hatha Yoga, because at least you're doing something physical that has a spiritual effect that may chill you out. Because would you be mad, Aries, if I said that it's possible that a good portion of you have hyperactivity? And what I mean by that is that you like to be super active. And maybe that's a bad way of putting it, because maybe everybody else are a bunch of slugs. And I certainly feel that Aries has this energy level that can transfer to other people and be very energizing. So please do not take offense at that. So anyway, another thing too about Mars is it's about anger. So make sure that you learn how to, or, if there's some kind of an issue related to something that has upset you, that you are not sublimating it. Now, that sounds almost absurd to even discuss that with an Aries person, but you never know. Your natal Mars might be in Pisces, and you might have a tendency towards that. Maybe your natal Mars is in the 12th house as it is. One thing to note, the 12th house can be hidden enemies. And Mars here, this may be, I don't like to talk about that. The 7th house is open enemies. 12th house is hidden enemies. I don't like enemies in general, but maybe Aries people kind of enjoy that concept because you're warriors. So that wouldn't bother you. But there's not really much you can do. But that sounds kind of paranoid to me. But if that makes any sense to you, I just wanted to add that little piece into that. We have a lunar eclipse in a fellow fire sign, Sagittarius, 15 degrees on the 5th of June. So there's your 9th house. Now, that might be on the spiritual level, some kind of spiritual download, aha moment. Lunar eclipses are powerful full moons, and full moons can bring illumination to a situation. So, I don't know, for some of you who are the latter 14 degrees of Aries, this will occur in your 8th house, and there may have a similar effect, but even at a deeper level and maybe even transformative, like feeling the sense of letting go of something or bringing something to the surface that had been avoided. The 8th house is shadow work, and shadow is the trauma. The 8th house can be trauma, bringing that to the surface to be released. These things, when I say these things, they almost sound silly because I don't think that we do this consciously. I think that it happens, and this is why it's an eclipse, because it just kind of is like it comes upon us, these things, whether it's some kind of a revelation that you had. And I've had these kinds of things. I wouldn't even call it a spiritual experience. I would just say that something dawned upon me that kind of shifted my perspective on something. And that might be how it works for you. Whether it's in the 8th or 9th houses, it could have a spiritual connotation. And the 8th house is more of the spiritual, which I would say more free form and more metaphysical. The 9th house can be more of an organized philosophical belief system that resonates with you, that you really, it's almost like you understand it for the first time. Sometimes people, sometimes it takes a while to really understand certain books and teachings, and you have to be ready for it. So that might be a spiritual influence no matter what house it is for Aries. And you've recently in the past year had Jupiter make a year-long transit or 13-month transit in Sagittarius. And so you may have expanded this 9th house and, your understanding of 9th house matters, a year ago. But this is kind of on the heels of that. Mercury goes retrograde. We have a Mercury retrograde in addition to all these other retrogrades happening on June 18th. But it's so funny because with all the shutdown stuff that's been happening, it already feels like a retrograde. I think this is going to be an improvement. Strangely enough, I honestly believe that. For you, this is in the fourth house of home and family. So again, as I was stating, if you have been in the process of moving house, selling house, maybe you might have already sold a house and are living in temporary digs, or that you're going to be, you were looking for a new property, and if something may fall through or have to be, looked at again with Mercury retrograde, whether it's the contract to the house, whether it's some kind of inspection, whatever it is, something may need to be done over or looked at. But there is a few days after that, on the 21st, a solar eclipse here. So it's interesting. During the Mercury retrograde, we have a solar eclipse in Cancer. And so if something falls through a few days later, I hesitate to put it like that and say a few days later, because the eclipses may not actually be felt on that specific date. But it might be a short time after that Mercury goes retrograde that you experience that the new seeds planted in the area of home, and that could include more possibilities. So if you were disappointed that something hasn't worked out, don't fret, because it doesn't mean that you're not going to get another opportunity, not by a long shot. The solar eclipse here, on the heels of the summer solstice, or winter solstice, where depending on which hemisphere you reside on, 0 degrees of Cancer is the solar eclipse, and the sun going into Cancer the day before is the solstice. And so these are two powerful days, the 20th and the 21st. Just as at the end of this year, right around the same time, it's going to be very powerful as well. So we've got these bookends in terms of solstices. In the sandwich portion, in the 6 months between this time, is a great time for you to focus on the domestic area and what you want to have, come to harvest or fruition, because there will be a lunar eclipse here, I believe, the last in the Cancer Capricorn axis, happening on December 30th. So it's a little bit over 6 months from now. So that could be the culmination of all of this. And on the 23rd, we have Neptune retrograding at 20 degrees of Pisces. So Neptune is also in that 12th house, in its own house. And this gives you more of that spiritual influence. And but turning retrograde, it can make certain things apparent to you. If you have been indulging in escapism of some sort, Aries, this can lay that bare, which is good, because you can see how you need to kind of let certain things go that relate to this particular sector. You are going to have a full moon here in several months. I think it's like September 2nd. So between now and then, you may be in the process of, maybe letting go of an addiction, some sort of, self-defeating pattern can come into your awareness, because the 12th house can be the house of undoing, self-undoing, but also the house of addiction, of this, self-deception or deception in general, suffering, karma, and escapism, which addiction is a form of, actually. And Neptune retrograde can kind of remove the veil from your eyes about this. And that makes it easier to do. Mars can, funnily enough, if funnily is a word, Mars in the 12th house may make you motivated to eradicate something that has been dogging you in this area. And it's the house of the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind. And sometimes we do things almost like we're zombies. We don't even know why we're doing them. And this can be the 12th house at play. Karmic patterns, samskaras, as the Buddhists call it. And these and it's funny because it means grooves, psychic grooves, like kind of grooves in a record. I guess you have to be a certain age to remember those, when a record would have these grooves in it. But yeah, the doing something over and over again and developing strong habitual patterns and letting go of those. So first you have to know exactly what it is, because with the 12th house, you can be doing it automatically and not really even thinking about it. On the 25th, Venus turns direct in that third house, and that can move you forward in the area of, and this can be even internet-based. The 11th house is also the internet, but the third house is any form of communication. So if you have been dealing with somebody from your past and maybe you hooked up on Facebook, social media can be the third house. And maybe you were kind of spellbound because this person came on with all sweetness and light, and now you kind of see things clearly that Venus went direct. And that's interesting that Neptune is going retrograde and kind of also showing that sense of more realistic thinking, because that could even be karmic patterns or karmic relationships. Okay, that's what I have for you, Aries. I hope that you resonated with this. If you would like a private reading, I do natal charts. I do the whole 9 yards. Check me out. I have a link below. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.